In this lesson, we will learn how to create a custom muscle in Max. What's great is that we can use the tools that we have already learned to create this custom muscle, say for a few very rudimentary modeling steps. So let's say we go ahead and get started. We'll start by creating our bone object, and we'll make sure that it can squash and stretch. So we'll head over to the animation menu, and we'll grab our bone tools, and let's go ahead and grab Create Bones. Alright, so now, enabling Snap with the S key, we can now go ahead and create a bone with an even length. So we'll start from the center and we'll move 3 grid units to our left and create the root. We'll now go to the center and create our end, moving 3 grid units to the right. Alright, so now we can go ahead and right click to exit our bone tool. And now with the root selected, this is what will act as our muscle object. Let's go ahead and turn off freeze length, and we'll use squash as our squash and stretch method. Alright, so what this means now is if we were to grab our nub, let's go ahead and disable snapping, again with the S key. If we were to now go to our move tool and start to move this, there's our squash and stretch. Very cool. Alright, so let's go ahead and rename these objects. The root object we will rename to bn underscore muscle 01. The nub, let's go ahead and rename that to nub muscle 01. And this object will not be skin to. Selecting our muscle again, we could always go ahead and recolor it, so we know again exactly what object we'll skin to. Alright, great. So now it's time to add a bit of thickness to this object. So let's go ahead and head over to our Modify panel. Let's go ahead and use a width of 8 and a height of 8 as well. Okay, great. So the next thing we could do is start to round out this shape so it looks more like a muscle. So here's where our modeling steps come into play. And this won't take much time at all. So what I'll do is go to wireframe mode with F3, and with our root selected, the actual muscle object, let's go ahead and right click and convert it to an editable poly. And this does not mean that we lose our squash and stretch. So that's really cool. Okay, so now going back to our muscle, let's enter our edge subobject. We'll go ahead and grab the edges in the very center, and we'll add an edge loop using our graphite tools. So at the top, let's go to loops, and we'll insert a loop. Now let's go ahead and slide this loop down to the opposite end. And to make sure that its thickness will be matched to the thickness on the opposite end, we can go ahead and move to our front view. Let's go ahead and zoom in. And now we can grab our scale tool and just scale our edges up. Alright, simple as that. So now when we go back to our perspective view, you can see both ends match. Let's now select the edges in the center again, and we'll create another loop, again, just to round this out a bit more. Alright, so from here, we could just go ahead and kind of scale this out just a bit. And that's looking nice. So if we were to go ahead and exit the subobject level and grab our nub and start to move this around, there's our squash and stretch behavior. If you wanted to round this out even further, I'll show you how to do that. We can go ahead and work with the Swift Loop tool. So if we were to head over to Edit, we can grab Swift Loop. And now I'll move over to the left view, and we'll align this right to our grid line in the center. You can see that the edge loop will not continue all the way through, but that's easy to fix. We can use the Connect tool to take care of that. Let's now move to our top view and do the same. Again, we'll align to the edge loop, or align to the grid line right in the center to make sure that this edge loop will be centered. And now we can go ahead and move back to our perspective view and right click to exit the Swift Loop tool. Alright, so taking a look at the end that tapers the most here, you could see that there's no need to work with the Connect tool to finish up here. That's actually good to go. So what we need to do is now just kind of use the Connect tool to create just a few more edges on the opposite end. Alright, so let's go ahead and grab our vertex subobject level, and we'll go ahead and start by grabbing this point at the side. We'll control click the point at the very tip. Underneath, our Edit Vertices rollout, we'll find Connect. So that's how we'll go ahead and attach these. Just a few more. Alright, so now we can quickly go in and add more thickness by grabbing the vertices that we've just added. So I'll go ahead and start along the sides. Just go ahead and select these 6 points. And we can go ahead and scale them out in our x-axis. Let's grab our scale tool and just round out the shape a bit. And now we can go ahead and finish up by grabbing the 6 points along the top and bottom of this muscle and do the same, just scale these out, this time in the z-axis. Alright, so what we're left with is a rounded shape. So now if we were to, let's say, take a look at our muscle, go ahead and grab the nub, you can see that we have an object that acts more like a muscle does, or it has a bit of roundness, more like a muscle should have. Of course, we can take it a step further, but it's not really necessary. This is going to work very well. Alright, so we have our muscle object in place. What's next? Now we need to create a set of anchor points so that we can go ahead and connect those anchor points to our skeleton to have the muscle to form. So we can work with helpers for this. Let's go to Create, Helpers, and we'll go ahead and create a point helper. We'll make sure that its display set to cross, and the size might work here with the value of 10. So I'll go ahead and add it to the scene. We can now right-click to exit our helper tool, and let's go ahead and quick align this to our nub. We'll go ahead and clone this object, holding down Shift. We'll go ahead and drag away, and we'll make sure this is a copy, and we will now quick align this to the root. Alright, let's go ahead and rename these objects. So the one at the root will be renamed to PT underscore muscle underscore anchor underscore A01. So we know clearly that this is the root of our muscle. I'll go ahead and copy the name. And the helper at the end will simply rename to anchor B. So we know that this is the end. Alright, great. Now the next step is to create an up vector object. The reason why is because we'll want to make sure that as the end anchor moves about, the muscle will always be reoriented to follow this point. So let's go ahead and grab our root. We'll hold down Shift, and we'll go ahead and drag this helper up to create a copy. We can rename it from here. That's going to be PT up VCT muscle anchor A01. We'll need to make sure that this is linked to anchor A. And now we can go ahead and change its display. We can go ahead and set the size to 5. Okay, again, we just want to differentiate each display here for clarity. Beautiful. So the next step is to create a set of constraints. Let's go ahead and start with position constraints. We'll go ahead and take our muscle, and we will grab our position constraint tool and tie this to anchor A. We'll grab the nub, and we will position constrain to anchor B. So here's what we end up with if we were to go ahead and grab anchor A and start to move that. Again, we're driving the position, and we do the same thing when we start to move anchor B, but you could see that the muscle does not point at anchor B, nor does it follow anchor A correctly. All right, simply because as anchor A moves, we need to make sure that it will always point towards the end. All right, so we can go ahead and take care of this with a look at constraint, and we're just about finished. So let's go ahead and grab our muscle. You can see clearly, if we were to go ahead and look at the axis of this object, you can see that it points in the X. So that means setting up our look at constraint will be very easy to do because by default, that is our look at axis. So with our muscle selected, let's go ahead and head back over to Animation, Constraints, and we'll grab our look at constraint and tie that to anchor B. There's our view line. let's go ahead and hide it. We'll go ahead and scroll down and right click on the viewline length parameter. Alright, great. So now we need to define our up node. Let's go ahead and uncheck world and we'll assign the up node. And then next we'll need to make sure our up node control is set to look at. Alright, so watch this. Now, in no time at all, our muscle will be oriented properly. Really cool. How fun is that? So all we really need to do now is create a global node that will globally reposition, reorient, and resize this rig, which is going to most certainly be necessary. So we can match this to whatever character we'd like. Alright, so what we can do is work with another helper. Let's go to wireframe mode. I'll also enable snapping. And we can go ahead and clone another helper and snap it to the very center. We can rename this to PT Muscle Global 01. Alright, let's also change its display. I'll go ahead and turn off snapping. I'll head over to the Modify panel, and instead of cross, we'll use box, and we'll go ahead and increase this quite a bit. So again, it's easy to select, let's say, to about a value of maybe about 36. There's 3 more units. Alright, great. So once this is in place, we now want to take pretty much every object except for, of course, the nub and our up node because they are already linked. So we just want to take the rest of our objects and link to this global node. And then we can freeze transforms. So we'll go ahead and grab our 2 anchors. We'll grab our muscle. And we'll go ahead and link to our global node. Alright, so when we grab the global node and start to move that around, the entire muscle rig will follow. You can go ahead and resize this and everything will still work. And we could also, of course, reposition it wherever we'd like it to be. Alright, so let's go ahead and freeze transforms. So all we need to do is freeze transforms on the global node and our helpers, the other helpers we have. So the up node and the start and end anchors. We don't want to do that on the muscle because that will clear out our look at constraint. Alright, so with all of these selected, we'll go ahead and alt right click and choose freeze transform. And now we're good to go. If we were to go ahead and start to move this around and we need to pop back to the default position, we use transform to 0. So there it is. We have created a custom muscle, which is really exciting. What's even more exciting is we'll see it in action in the next lesson. What I'd highly recommend that you do is to just go ahead and save the scene out as, let's say, muscle, so you could always repurpose this asset. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. And then in the next lesson, we'll go ahead and apply it to a skinned asset.